what will happen is it's going to go through every entry in the manifest file and try to download it, right? It's going to check cache headers, the typical kind of things that the browser normally does, and it's going to go through that process of firing the downloading event to signal that we're downloading things, and then for every file or resource that it's downloading from the manifest file, it's going to fire the progress event. And it's going to continually fire the progress event for every resource. When it's finished downloading all those resources, it's going to make another decision. Is this a brand new app that we first saw, or is it one that we've seen before? If it's something we've already cached, okay, so meaning we haven't seen it before, it's going to fire the cached event, explaining that we've just cached this for the first time. This is the first time the browser's seen it. It's the first time we've accessed it. And it's available in the cache. So the next time you access it, it will be there. If it's something that we have cached before, we have, it fires the update ready event. And the update ready event is a signal that we've seen it before, now we can do something with it. That's something you can do, something that you can do with it is you can optionally call the swap cache method on the window application cache. I'm going to get to why this is there's a caveat here. The swap cache has some behavior that isn't exactly how we would probably expect it to behave, and I'm going to go into that a little bit, but that is something that will basically allow everything that you've just downloaded to be immediately available or subsequently available for all future requests. So it's basically saying, hey, that cache that the new cache that we just downloaded, the new set of files that we downloaded from within the cache, we're going to start using those new files as opposed to the old. Because keep in mind, this all happens when we've already viewed an existing cached application, okay? So all these events fire, if you've already had an application running and you've gone to visit it again and it's already been cached, you're going to get pretty much instant access to that app. These all things happen in the background if you've already seen it before. In fact, they all happen in the background regardless, actually. So these are the events that you have access to manage that cache. Along the process, there are 6 states that the application cache can be in. Okay, at any time you can query into the state of the cache. If it's something that hasn't been cached yet, we're in the uncached state. If it's something that nothing's happening right now, we're kind of done, we're in the idle state. Checking is when we're checking the manifest file, and then we could be downloading the files, and the update ready event, which is what I talked about, but that's the status that it's in. There's also an obsolete, which kind of generates an error. One thing I forgot to talk about on the last. At any time during this entire process, there's an error event that fires. And that error event is something went terribly wrong. Sometimes it's the case that the manifest file wasn't available, the manifest file syntax was invalid. All these things can kind of catch you. So we went through all the event processing or how it goes about. When you jump into an application cache application, you're going to have some debugging troubles. It's just invariable. So there's a couple great tips that I'm going to share to help you get through this debugging session of trying to make sure that everything's working. A lot of times you might forget an entry in your manifest file, and so the cache is somewhat invalid. Sometimes the manifest file has an invalid syntax or whatnot. The first in Chrome, you may not be aware, but there's an about page, which lists all the different debugging options you have within Chrome. One that is pretty useful is the app cache internals. This will show you every application that you have cached, okay? Another that's pretty useful, and this is better for debugging when you get into the thick of it. Where is it? Net internals. Net internals gives us the ability to track all events that Chrome is performing. Okay, and this is also quite useful. You can see when the socket's trying to be accessed. You can see you actually get more information than you probably need. But if you really need to dive into it and you're really confused about whether or not you're accessing files that have been cached or not, this is key. It's gonna give you a lot of detail into that regard. I think there's another reasonable one here. so I can find it. Profiler. I don't play with the profiler much, but there's another set of debugging tools to use within Chrome to help through some of this process. Thanks. I'm actually going to need you back here. I'm going to need you back. The other debugging tip I'm going to share, there was a blog post by Jonathan Stark who wrote a bit of JavaScript to help log all those events that I talked about earlier on all the application cache events. And let's see here, the app cache.
He's also the maintainer of JQ Touch.
Oh, is he? Yep. Very good. And it's a really good set of JavaScript snippets. Now, Andy talked about learning JavaScript, right? He advocated everyone to learn JavaScript. What I'm showing you now is CoffeeScript, okay? You should learn that, all right? No, you need to understand JavaScript, but I'm a huge advocate of CoffeeScript. And for those that don't know, CoffeeScript is a language that compiles down to JavaScript. Some call it a transcompiler. But that's what you're seeing now. You're seeing CoffeeScript. So what we did at BusyConf was we took Jonathan Stark's snippet, converted it to CoffeeScript, and modified it for own use. And so that we have a nice debugging tool for cross-browser access. And so what we have here is we have all the list of events that are available, or the statuses that are available. And we bind an event listener to when the DOM loads, and then we add other event listeners for every one of the app cache events. And we log that event, and we put it in console log. Now, this is all well and good. It helps out a ton. You'll see how things are invalidated, how things are downloading and whatnot, and makes life a lot easier. And what I'll do is, that gist will get you to that code. We're sharing that, and we'll share the slides afterwards to make sure everyone has it available. Now, if you don't want to use this, you can just use Chrome. Chrome's, by default, console logs all the same events, which is pretty nice. That snippet of CoffeeScript logs it in a little more detail, and also gives you cross-browser support to log these events in an easy way. But Chrome does a really good job, and that's usually what I use to start with, and then we dive into the more detailed stuff if we need to. So, I mentioned there were some gotchas. I've already talked about some of them. One thing to know, and this isn't really a gotcha, it's more of just a good to know kind of tip, is that manifest file that we talked about, it's downloaded twice, especially on a cache update. So what happens is, we've seen an application, we check the application cache, it downloads the manifest file rather, downloads all the resources if there was an update, and at the end of that process, it downloads the manifest again. Okay, it does that to make sure that from the time we started downloading the app to the time we finished downloading the app, that it was the same manifest file, so that we know that we're not invalid. Just something to know about, not something too big of a deal to worry about, but it's valuable to know when you see the logs running through on your server and you see this manifest file accessed twice. Gotcha number 2 is to be beware of the swap cache. I talked about this method we could call after the update ready event happens that would allow us to swap out the resources that the cache had downloaded, and the browser had downloaded in the cache. And a lot of documentation online will lead you to believe that this is some magical, method that will hot swap all your data out, and your page is going to automatically show everything that was recently downloaded. That's not the case. The spec actually lists it as something that only, let's see if I can get this right. The specs list it as something that will only swap out the resources for subsequent downloads. Okay, so it's not really a hot swap. It's really more of gives you the access to download all the new resources after the fact of the new application that you just downloaded of refreshing that cache. And what does that mean? That means, for most parts, you can pretty much ignore the swap cache method. Unless you're doing a lot of extra work, it's actually easier to either prompt the user to reload the page, or to prompt the user with a link that would then call window.location.reload. such that you're just going to get a page refresh. And when you do that, it's going to be almost instant because you've already got everything cached. And so that subsequent request is going to be pretty much an instant refresh, but you're going to get all the behavior that you would have expected in a true hot swap.